Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today, we're doing a really critical deep dive into a foundational text, Neil Postman's shockingly prophetic work, Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business.
And the mission here, I think, is just so crucial, especially now, decades after it was first published. This isn't just about a book. This is about recognizing that our media forms, the actual technologies we use to talk to each other, they don't just shape what we think about. They shape the underlying structures of how we think. They actually define what truth even looks like in a culture.
That is the absolute core of it. We're looking at how entertainment media, and for Postman, that was specifically television, but we'll get to its descendants, how it completely transforms public discourse. And this isn't, just some complaint about bad taste or declining standards.
It's not nostalgia.
No, not at all. Postman is making a much deeper argument. He's saying the consequences are cultural, they're social, and maybe most importantly, they're epistemological. It's about how we know what we know.
Right. It changes our definition of knowledge itself. So let's just jump right in with the central anxiety that really drives this entire book. It's a brilliant hook, really. He sets up this contrast between two massive dystopian visions, George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World.
That's right. And you have to remember, in the mid-'80s when he was writing, people were very, very attuned to the Orwellian terror. That was the big fear.
The boot on the face.
Exactly. The oppressive state, controlling people by inflicting pain, by banning books, by hiding the truth. Everyone was on a lookout for Big Brother.
So Orwell warned us about this external oppression, a totalitarian state that would literally censor us and use fear to keep us in line.
But Postman's big argument, his big warning, is that we were all watching the wrong prophet. He thought Huxley was the one who saw our future more clearly.
And Huxley's fear was something much more insidious.
Far more. Huxley saw a future where Big Brother wouldn't even be necessary. People wouldn't need to be forced to give up their autonomy or their history because they would come to love the very technologies that were undoing their capacity to think.
That is the big, powerful aha moment in the book, the part that just sticks with you. Orwell was afraid books would be banned. But Huxley, he was afraid no one would even want to read a book. Orwell feared the truth would be concealed from us. Huxley feared it would just be drowned in a sea of total irrelevance, just noise.
And that gets you to the starkest distinction of all. Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. Prescient, censorship, pain. But Huxley feared that what we love will ruin us.
Amusement, pleasure, distraction.
Exactly. And Postman just lays out this incredibly detailed argument that Huxley was right.
Yeah.
We are a people who are, right now, enthusiastically amusing ourselves to death.
It's a terrifying thought because it's voluntary. Okay, so to really unpack this huge shift, we need to first look at the man who gave the warning, Neil Postman, and the lens he used.
Neil Postman was a real intellectual force, a critic, an educator, a communications theorist. He's most famous for founding the media ecology program at NYU. And that's not just a biographical detail. You really have to understand media ecology to get this book.
Can you break that down a little for our listeners? What exactly is media ecology?
So media ecology is basically the study of media as environments. It looks at how our communication tools, print, radio, TV, the internet, how they function like an invisible environment that shapes everything. Our perception, our behavior, our thoughts.
So it's like the water the fish swims in.
That's the perfect analogy. The fish doesn't know it's in water. We don't really see our media environment until we step outside it. So a media ecologist doesn't just ask, what does this new gadget do? They ask, what does this new gadget undo? What old ways of thinking does it push aside?
That context is so important. So he's writing this book right at the peak of television's power in American culture. Print still had some influence, but TV was just taking over everything. He's writing from inside the storm, looking at the structural damage.
And he is not subtle about where he thinks the culture is heading. He uses this really powerful metaphor, using cities to represent the American spirit over time.
Right. He talks about Boston as, the home of political radicalism, then New York, the great melting pot, Chicago, the symbol of industrial power.
But then he asks a big question. What's the metaphor for America now, in the television age? And his conclusion is Las Vegas.
Wow.
A city devoted entirely, 100%, to entertainment, to spectacle, to instant gratification.
That's a pretty damning image. It suggests our whole cultural project has shifted from, say, production or intellectual debate to just performance and distraction.
And that is his core thesis.
Yeah.
The book is an inquiry into this shift from what he calls the age of typography, the age of print, to the age of television. And he argues it has, and this is a direct quote, dramatically and irreversibly shifted the content and meaning of public discourse.
So everything, our politics, our religion, our news, even our education, it's all just become a sideshow for the entertainment industry.
Pretty much, yeah. And the concept that underpins all of this is what he calls the medium is the metaphor. It's a step beyond Marshall McLuhan's famous, the medium is the message.
How so? What's the difference?
Well, it's not just that the medium affects the message. Postman is saying the actual physical form of our communication tools has the strongest possible influence on what ideas can even be conveniently expressed. And those convenient ideas, they inevitably become the important ideas of a culture. The form dictates the content.
So the tool itself sets the terms for what we can even think about?
Yes, the form itself determines what a culture will accept as knowledge, as truth. He uses this great example. Smoke signals. You don't need a history book to know that Native Americans weren't using smoke signals to debate philosophy.
Right, because you can't. The medium itself is too simple. It doesn't last long enough. It's just not built for complex arguments.
Exactly. The form excludes the content. So now you apply that same logic to television. He brings up President William Howard Taft, who was, a very large man. In a print culture, his physical appearance was totally irrelevant to his arguments.
Sure, you're just reading his words.
But on television, that visual image could easily overwhelm anything he said. Television, as a visual medium that loves the close-up, it just isn't built for complex political philosophy. It's built for image, for personality, for emotion.
He's really forcing us to look at the deep-seated assumptions of our culture. He even goes all the way back to the Bible, to the Second Commandment.
The prohibition against graven images, yeah. It seems like a purely religious rule, but Postman analyzes it as a kind of prophetic media critique. The God of the ancient Jews was a totally new idea, a God who existed only in the Word and abstract concepts. This required, the highest level of abstract thinking.
So no pictures allowed, because that forces you to develop your abstract reasoning.
That's his argument. He suggests that the habit of making concrete images, of depicting ideas in physical form, would make people intellectually unfit to grasp this universal abstract deity. The image itself was a form of blasphemy because it's structurally at odds with abstract thought. It was a warning that the forms we use to communicate shape the very quality of our thinking.
Wow! That is a huge claim, that the visual medium itself undermines our ability to think abstractly. So if the image and spectacle define this age of show business, we have to understand what came before it, what he called the age of exposition.
Right. The age of exposition, This is roughly the 18th and 19th centuries in America, a time when the printed word wasn't just a medium, it was the medium. It was the model, the metaphor, and the measure for all serious public conversation.
And what was the bias of that print culture? What did the typographic mind, as he calls it, value as truth?
The typographic mind was structurally biased toward rationality, toward seriousness, toward sustained linear thought. I mean, to read a complex argument in a book, you have to follow a line of reasoning from start to finish. You have to classify things, make inferences, spot logical fallacies.
And you have to withhold judgment until the very end. You can't just react emotionally to the first sentence.
Exactly. And the reader is isolated. It's just you and the text. You have to use your own mind to figure it out. You can't be swayed by the author's charisma or, how good-looking they are. The whole discourse was proposition-based. It had to make a factual claim, an assertion that you could then challenge with logic.
He has that great line about how, in a print culture, intelligence was defined as being able to live comfortably without pictures in a field of concepts and generalizations.
Yeah, and the insult for someone who wasn't very smart was that you had to draw them a picture. That way of thinking perfectly encapsulates a cognitive style that we've, largely lost.
And you see this mental stamina everywhere in the historical examples from that time. The Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858 are just almost unbelievable from a modern perspective.
They're completely unimaginable today. These were debates for a Senate seat, but they were massive public events, drawing thousands of people. He talks about the debate in Peoria, Illinois. It started in the afternoon, they broke for dinner, and then they came back for 4 more hours of talk.
After they had already listened for 3 hours?
Yes. 7 hours of dense, complex political oratory. And the audience wasn't bored. They were cheering, they were engaged, they were following every intricate point. That tells you something about their capacity for sustained, complex listening.
The speakers assumed the audience was smart. They used complex sentences modeled on written language because they trusted the listeners could keep up.
And that wasn't just in politics. It was the foundation of the legal system. America was founded by intellectuals who prized the written word. We have a written constitution for a reason. The whole legal profession demanded that you be a man of writing and reading, devoted to logic.
Even advertising was like this at first.
Yeah, early newspaper ads, from as far back as the early 1700s, were basically little essays. They were long, text-heavy arguments that appealed to your understanding, not to passions. They listed facts and reasons to buy a product.
But Postman points to a specific turning point around the 1890s where this descent of the typographic mind really begins.
That's when the graphic revolution hits. When images and slogans start to take over, you see this massive shift from long rational copy to short, emotional phrases. Like Kodak's slogan, you press the button, we do the rest.
Right. No more arguments, just a promise of ease and a feeling.
Exactly. Advertisers stopped assuming their customers were rational beings to be persuaded. They started treating them as bundles of subconscious desires to be triggered. That's a fundamental shift in how you see the public.
And the final piece of this typographic age was its relationship with history. A book is linear, it has a past tense, it promotes this sense of a coherent, usable past. And that's exactly what the next wave of media was about to shatter.
The shattering really kicked off in the mid-19th century. One invention changed everything by separating communication from transportation for the first time in human history.
The electric telegraph. Samuel F.B. Morse. Before that, information could only move as fast as a person on a horse or a train. Suddenly, it's moving at the speed of light.
And you had thinkers like Henry David Thoreau who saw the problem immediately. He had that famous line about the rush to connect Maine and Texas when they might have nothing important to communicate. He was, it turns out, exactly right.
The telegraph basically invented a new kind of information. Postman calls it context-free information, and he says it attacked the typographic mind in 3 ways. Let's take the first one, irrelevance.
So with the telegraph, the value of information became its novelty, its newness, not its usefulness. Suddenly, you're in New York reading about a murder in Maine. It's interesting, maybe, but what can you do about it? Nothing. Most news became inert. It gave you something to talk about, but it didn't lead to any meaningful action in your own life.
Which leads directly to the second problem, impotence. The information-action ratio, as he calls it, gets completely out of whack.
Totally. For the first time, you're flooded with information about problems all over the globe, problems you are completely powerless to solve. What's your plan for fixing the economy in Brazil or resolving a border dispute in Asia? You have no plan. The information just washes over you and creates this sense of helplessness.
He has that brutal line about voting becoming the next-to-last refuge of the politically impotent. The only thing left after that is giving your opinion to a pollster. It's a performance of participation, but the information glut has already made you feel powerless.
And the third disruptive element was just incoherence. The telegraph was built for flashing of messages, for speed, not for depth.
So you get the language of headlines. Sensational, fragmented, impersonal, all continuity and context get sacrificed for the sake of immediacy. The long, sequential thinking of the printed page just starts to seem slow, obsolete.
And right alongside this, you have the rise of photography, the graphic revolution. And like the telegraph, a photograph just shows you a single disconnected moment. A photograph has no beginning, no middle, no end. It's just the present frozen in time.
So the image starts to replace language as the main way we understand reality. Postman says that for many Americans, seeing, not reading, became the basis for believing.
And when you combine all this, the fragmentation, the irrelevance, the visual dominance, you create a kind of cognitive crisis. What do you do with all this useless information? Society has to adapt. And that's where he introduces the idea of the pseudo-context.
Such a brilliant term. When information has no real use in your life, you invent a fake context to give it a seeming use, and that use is always amusement.
That's why things like crossword puzzles became so popular. And later, the game Trivial Pursuit. Trivial Pursuit is the ultimate epistemology of the telegraphic age. It's knowing a million disconnected facts, but knowing nothing about them. It's knowledge as pure entertainment.
So the pseudo-context is how we cope with being overwhelmed by useless information. And this whole new way of knowing, the image and the instancy, it reached its, as he says, exquisite and dangerous perfection when television showed up.
Television took the biases of the telegraph and the photograph, combined them, and then piped them directly into every home in the country. It made them inescapable.
And that's when this peekaboo world became the world we all lived in. Television became what he calls a meta-medium. It didn't just tell us about the world, it directed our very ways of knowing. It became the background radiation of our whole social and intellectual universe.
And once TV is in charge, its primary bias becomes clear. The problem isn't that television is entertaining. That's obvious. The problem, the deep structural problem, is that all subject matter is presented as entertaining. Entertainment becomes the super ideology for everything.
And he argues it's an active attack on literate culture. Because the technology itself, the format, demands images, not concepts. The average shot length on TV news is something like 3.5 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of complex idea can you possibly develop in 3.5 seconds?
Yeah.
You can't. So you look at the news show, and Postman just calls it what it is: vaudeville. A variety show. It has high aspirations, but because it has to be entertaining, it becomes trivial and therefore most dangerous.
The whole thing is designed for pleasure, not for understanding. And it starts with the casting, right?
Starts with the casting. He talks about producers choosing talking hairdos. They actively exclude anyone who doesn't look likable or credible on camera. He uses the case of Christine Kraft, a news anchor who was fired in the 80s because her bosses said her appearance hampered viewer acceptance.
That case just perfectly illustrates how the very definition of truth gets corrupted. On television, truth isn't about facts or logic anymore. Truth is the credibility of the person telling you something. It's about how sincere they seem, how attractive they are, how well they perform.
The image is everything. This is his explanation for Richard Nixon. Nixon's downfall wasn't just that he lied. It was that he looked like a liar on camera during the Watergate hearings. He failed the visual test of sincerity, and in the television age, that was a fatal flaw.
And the mechanism that drives this triviality, the thing that operates on us every single night, is that little phrase, now this.
Yes, he turns that simple transition into this powerful metaphor for how discourse is systematically shattered.
Now, this basically tells you that the 45-second story you just saw about a famine or a war has absolutely zero connection to what's coming next, which might be a commercial for a fast food burger.
It's a form of anti-communication. It structurally trains you to abandon logic, to not look for connections or cause and effect. The news is just one disconnected thing after another.
And the juxtaposition of, say, a tragedy with a commercial for laundry detergent, it just renders the serious stuff banal, makes it all feel like part of the same show.
And that's a devastating lesson for a culture, especially for young people. They learn that death and suffering are structurally interchangeable with consumer products. They learn that serious things are not to be taken seriously.
He even analyzed TV at its most serious. There was this big 80-minute discussion after the TV movie The Day After, which was about a nuclear attack.
Right, this was supposed to be as serious as television could get. No commercials, a panel of intellectual heavyweights, Henry Kissinger, Robert McNamara, Elie Wiesel. But what happened? The format completely defeated the content.
Each person got, 5 minutes? And they didn't have to respond to each other. They just gave little speeches.
It was a series of disconnected statements. It wasn't a discussion. There was no time to say, hold on, what do you mean by that? Or let me think about that for a second. Because thinking doesn't look good on television. It's not visual. There's nothing to see.
So they just performed their roles as serious thinkers instead of actually having a serious debate. The result was entertaining in a weird way, but it had no intellectual weight.
And that same logic applies directly to politics. If the news show is vaudeville, then the television commercial becomes the model for all political discourse.
And commercials are all about brevity, 15 or 20 seconds. And they never use logical propositions. They just use emotional appeal and offer instant therapy.
The commercial is the ultimate form of instant therapy. It tells you all problems can be solved, they can be solved fast, and they can be solved with a product. When you apply that to politics, the whole goal of a campaign changes.
It's no longer about expressing ideas. It's about expressing the viewer, about creating an image that soothes the audience's anxieties. The politician becomes a celebrity, completely detached from any actual expertise.
Postman uses that old telephone ad, reach out and touch someone, as the perfect metaphor. The ad isn't about the phone's technology. It's about the warm, fuzzy feeling you're supposed to get. Political ads do the same thing. It's not about policy. It's about which candidate's image is best at touching our deepest psychological needs. We vote for a feeling, not a platform.
And this kind of image politics contributes to what he calls the historical void. Television's grammar, its focus on the now, just has no room for the past.
Right. Context requires history, and television structurally avoids context.
Hmm.
So history gets replaced by this continuous, incoherent present. He argues that the medium itself makes us unfit to remember because it gives us no framework to organize facts and see patterns over time.
And this even applies to religion. When religion goes on TV, it gets transformed into show business.
He watched hours and hours of televangelism and concluded that it's just another form of entertainment. Everything that makes religion challenging or profound gets stripped away. There's no complex dogma, no difficult rituals, no real sense of transcendence.
The preachers even model their shows on secular entertainment, like the Merv Griffin show. It becomes completely market-driven.
They openly talk about controlling the content to maximize ratings. They follow the rule that you can only get an audience by giving people what they want, which is a total inversion of most religious traditions, which are about giving people what they need, which is often difficult, not what they want, which is easy and amusing.
Plus, the medium itself works against it. You can't really consecrate a space when the viewer's at home eating dinner or doing push-ups.
And the close-up shot makes the preacher the focus of worship, not the ideas or the deity. When you take a serious, demanding religion and make it easy and fun, it's not that religion anymore. It's just another TV show.
Finally, he turns his attention to education. And his argument is that television's main contribution to educational philosophy is this single radical idea that teaching and entertainment are inseparable.
Which is a completely new idea. Education has always been based on the idea that learning is hard work. It requires prerequisites, structure, and a mental effort. Television's curriculum is the exact opposite.
He lays out television's 3 educational commandments, which are totally at odds with the traditional school curriculum.
First, thou shalt have no prerequisites. Everything must be instantly accessible. Second, thou shalt induce no perplexity. If a viewer has to stop and think, they might change the channel. So the content has to be satisfying, not challenging. And third, thou shalt avoid exposition. Arguments and logic are boring on TV. Everything has to be a story with dynamic images.
And education with no prerequisites, no perplexity, and no exposition is just entertainment. Which brings us to his big case study, The Voyage of the Mimi.
This was a huge, multi-million-dollar science project designed for the television age. The entire curriculum was built around a TV show. And the subject matter, humpback whales, was chosen for one reason.
Because it was eminently televisable.
Exactly. Not because it was the most important scientific topic, but because it made for great visuals. The books and worksheets became aids for the TV show, not the other way around. Learning becomes a form of entertainment. And the hidden lesson kids learn is that anything worth learning should be entertaining.
So when you step back and look at the whole system Postman is describing, you realize this isn't just a series of bad choices. It's an ideology without words.
A very clear, self-perpetuating system. The actors are everywhere. Broadcasters, advertisers, politicians, religious leaders. The incentives are all the same. Attention, ratings, spectacle, pleasure. And the mechanisms of control are built right into the medium itself.
Visual dominance, time compression, the decontextualization you see in formats like USA Today with its tiny paragraph-sized stories.
It's an entire electronic environment that encourages one specific way of using your mind. It favors fragmented, concrete thinking, and it actively mocks linear, abstract thought. The scary result is a culture at risk of mistaking ignorance for knowledge. We know of a lot of things, but we don't know anything about them.
Which brings us right back to that original Huxleyan fear. Distraction replaces oppression as the main form of social control.
Absolutely. The corporate state doesn't need to ban books if it can just flood the zone with so much entertaining irrelevance that nobody wants to read them anyway.
Tyranny is avoided because we just ignore anything that isn't amusing. Postman points out that a tyrant needs censorship because he assumes the public cares about serious discourse. But what if political discourse just becomes a joke? Then censorship is totally unnecessary.
The danger is the limits of an image-based truth. When knowing things just means you've seen a quick image or heard a quick fact, the public becomes what he called agitated amnesiacs. The bizarre world of television starts to seem natural, and how much we've adjusted to it is the measure of how much we've been changed.
So what's the ultimate takeaway here? What Postman helps us see is that this shift from a print-based epistemology to a television-based one has turned much of our public discourse into dangerous nonsense.
And the stakes are democracy itself. The way TV stages the world as brief, emotional, disconnected spectacle, that becomes the model for how the real world is supposed to be. The line between show business and public business just gets completely erased.
But wait a minute. Isn't he being a bit too pessimistic? I mean, surely there are serious things we still care about. What about economic inequality or climate change? We aren't just amusing ourselves, are we?
I think Postman would argue that our very inability to effectively deal with those huge issues is the proof of his thesis. Those problems require exactly the kind of sustained, complex, rational thought that our media environment discourages. When an issue like climate change is covered in 3 45-second segments, sandwiched between commercials, the medium itself trivializes the message. We might know the facts, but we're cognitively trained to treat them as just another piece of fleeting entertainment.
So it's not a lack of information, it's a failure of the form to allow us to process it seriously.
Mm.
And his solution isn't just turn off the TV. He knew that was impossible.
No, the antidote he offers is demystification. We have to achieve what he calls media consciousness. We have to learn to watch critically, to ask questions about the structure, the speed, the bias of the information we're getting. We have to understand that every technology is a trade-off. It gives us something, but it always takes something away.
We have to stop being so naive about technology being neutral. Every new medium comes with a program for social change already built into it.
Which brings us to the final, really cautionary reflection.
Yeah.
An Orwellian world is easy to spot. It's easy to oppose. It has clear villains and clear victims. But who is prepared to take up arms against a sea of amusements?
Huxley's point was that the people in Brave New World were ruined not because they were sad, but because they were laughing and they didn't know what they were laughing about or why they had stopped thinking. And Postman leaves us with that challenge. Decades later, with television fragmented into a million algorithmic feeds, the question is even more urgent. When everything is a pseudo-context, are we even capable of recognizing seriousness, let alone demanding it?
It's a heavy question. The velocity of irrelevance has only increased since he wrote the book, but his core critique of the medium's bias toward the image, toward brevity, toward emotion, it feels more relevant than ever.
This deep dive was based on Neil Postman, the author of Amusing Ourselves to Death, Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business. If this systems-level analysis of how media dictates thought has resonated with you, we strongly encourage you to read the book yourself, support the author, or borrow it from your local library.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.